In the name of Almighty, the most gracious and most merciful. Hello students, today we will be discussing about variable. I hope you have gone through the documents which I have shared, and you must have understood the concepts very well, the variable, and I also want you to relate it to the concept and construct and variables which we studied earlier. Now we are going to discuss about the variable, the smallest units which are used in the research. Just to define variable, what it is, like even in the last session I asked you about what is a variable, you gave a right answer. Like the common way of defining variable is something which varies. A variable is something which varies, like those attributes of objects, events, things and beings which can be measured are called as variable. This is another definition of variable. Like in research we always need something, like we saw research is an objective form of understanding things. When we are defining or trying to understand things objectively, we need to actually measure objects, events and things in form of micro units. It cannot be abstract, or it cannot be vague. Only when it is specific to some certain characteristics we will be able to measure it. So those smallest units in the research are called as variable. To go ahead with another definition of variable, these variables are characteristics and conditions that are manipulated or controlled or observed by the experimenter. Fine. It depends on the type of research, whether you just simply go and observe the variable or you try to control and manipulate the variable. Fine. But these are the things which a researcher try to control, manipulate or even observe. Those things are called as variable. Fine. Further, for example, intelligence can be a variable in a study, or income level can be called as a variable, or education, level of education can be called as variable, or various emotions, distress, anger, sadness, depression and all these things can be called as variables. Or there are like demographic variables, where in age or weight, height, all these things can also be called as variable. These are just few examples of variable. If you see, variables are a wide variety of variables are available. Fine. So just go quickly through the types of variable. Here we have got dependent and independent variable, qualitative and quantitative variable, continuous and discrete variable, and moderator variable and intervening variable. These are just variables divided into various types on the basis of its own characteristics and the way it is used in a study, and all the these types are given by A.K. Singh. A.K. Singh's textbook is what we will be referring to majorly, and I want you to, after understanding all these things, I want you to compare these variables with other textbooks and references we have. Okay, I have shared numerous references. You may get those references and read and understand what are variable and various types of variable. Various numerous other types are also available. Kindly go back and read about it. But here in this session I'll be dealing with all these things, including some other types of variable also in this. And these types of variable, before I explain about it in detail, I just want to give you a picture of what are things we will be covering from this A.K. Singh's book. First two types are dependent and independent. These are major two types of variables available in research. Whenever you take any kind of experimental research, you will see these two types of variable being discussed in it. I hope most of you in this class must be aware of dependent and independent variable. Independent variable is further divided into task variable, environmental variable and subject variable. Fine. These three are the major three types of independent variable. And then we have got extraneous variable, which always comes in between these two, independent and dependent variable. Fine. And this is a very major part, and we'll be discussing it in detail in the session. And next is qualitative variable and quantitative variables. It's a very simple classification of variables which we'll be using in research. And quantitative variable is further divided into continuous and discrete variable. Fine. And then we have another form of variable from, like, which is also called as a secondary independent variable, which is a type of independent variable which are moderator variable and intervening variable. These are the again two types of variable. There is one more type mentioned in AKSync, which is active variable and attribute variable. It's not a major classification, so I didn't include it in this picture, but we'll be discussing it further. Okay, these are the things we'll be discussing in this session, and you must know the connection between all these things, like, because most of the things may look similar to you, and of course those things are similar, it's just the names given varies. So let's start with dependent and independent variable. In order to make you understand what is a dependent and what is an independent variable, let me give you an example. Let's take a research in which we are actually dealing with students. We want to know how various teaching, like because of COVID we had a drastic change in the teaching and learning methodology, right? So let's study that. Okay, let's take a group of students and see effect of three different types of teaching methods. Like one method it can be like video, uploading videos, lectures, and another thing is like having a live lessons, online live lessons, and teaching the students. And the third can be like involving students, giving activities, online activities, and involving them in learning activities, involving them or giving activities to students and involving them in the learning process. We would like to know what which of these three techniques or methods of teaching is effective and has an influence or positive influence on the achievement of students. Fine. In this type of study we are conducting, like for example, like the group of students will be sample in the study, right? And we have got A, B, C, three teaching methods. Fine, three teaching methods, and we want to see the effect of three teaching methods on the achievement of students. Like maybe we can consider it as a test. We'll conduct a test, and how well they perform after each method is the experiment we have designed. Fine. In this you can see there are two types of variable. One is teaching method and another thing is achievement. These two things are variables. But what type of variable these two are? The teaching method is independent variable. Independent variable. Why? We are actually changing the teaching method, like from uploading video lessons to live lessons and to activity oriented teaching methods. We are changing it. The same variable, teaching method, is varying. Say level 1 is A, level 2, level 3. We have got different levels, and also we are manipulating here. Change is happening. So wherever there is a manipulation, that will be called as independent variable. And next, achievement here will be dependent variable. Why? This variable is depending on the independent variable. We are not directly manipulating. We are just measuring achievement. Here you are not changing anything. Fine. You must remember the word manipulation. I was telling you in the last session also, like manipulation, right? Manipulation is something, the term indicates wherein you are changing something. Fine. So manipulation is the most important term you must remember when it comes to independent variable. And it is not always manipulated. Sometimes the independent variable is also controlled. Fine. Direct manipulation will not be there. But all these methods are, independent variable and dependent variable classification comes in experimental study. Fine. Experimental studies. And dependent variable is something which is not tested by the experimenter at all. It is just measured and it is depending on the independent variable. So it is called as dependent variable. Like for example, by definition, dependent variable about which the experimenter makes predictions. We just make predictions about the dependent variable. We won't go to control or manipulate it. Fine. And the independent variable is one which is manipulated or controlled for seeing its effects on the dependent variable. Fine. So dependent variable is always depending on the independent variable, but whereas the independent variable is one which is manipulated or controlled by the experimenter. Hope dependent variable and independent variable is clear to you. Like independent variable, we have got two effects, like one is called floor effect, another thing is called a ceiling effect. It's a very common thing, you can read and understand it. Floor effect is, for example, the achievement was the dependent variable, right, in the example. So if the achievement test which you are giving is so easy, very easy to perform, in that case what happens is most of the students will get very good marks, right? So high marks everybody will be getting in all three methods of teaching, right? So there is a difficulty in measuring how much change happened in dependent variable because of all these three methods of teaching. Fine, when the test is too simple, the achievement test which we conducted, when it is too simple, it is, most of the students or almost all of them will get good marks. So that is called as, ceiling effect. Floor effect is, when everybody performs poor. Fine, when the task is very difficult. For example, in the previous example which we saw, if the exam was very tough, all of them scored very low marks. In that case, we will not be able to understand the differences caused due to the three teaching methods which we implemented. So that is called as floor effect. So these effects are there in the dependent variable. Similarly, in independent variable, there are two subtypes of independent variable, like type E and type S. For understanding this, let us consider some other example. Like for example, you have two types of studies. In the study 1, you want to see the effect of temperature on production. Fine, study 1. This is like study 1. In study 1, you want to see the effect of temperature on production. Fine. So here the temperature is your independent variable, right? This production is a dependent variable, right? So here you can actually control or manipulate this thing. You can manipulate temperature, right? You can have three levels of temperature, like high temperature, low temperature, and medium temperature, and then you can see how it is influencing the production, right? It is possible to change this temperature. But this in the study 2, second study, like we want to see the effect of age on production. Now we have got many employees. We want to know like what age affects the production or not. Here this is independent variable, right? Age is independent variable and production is dependent variable. But if you see the difference between these two independent variables are like this can be changed or manipulated, but this cannot be changed. Can you change age of a person? Manipulate age of person? No, it's not possible. So what you do is you will be selecting the sample on the basis of their age. Here you are not directly manipulating, but you are controlling it by selection process is differing. So the first one wherein you are able to control or manipulate it directly, those type of independent variables are called type E independent variable, and type S is something wherein you cannot directly change it, but indirectly you will try to change it by assigning or selection process. You will have certain selection process or assigning process through which you will try to change the independent variable or control the independent variable. So these are the type E and type S variable, which is like the subtypes of independent variable, you can call it as. And there are three types of independent variable given in this text. First one is task variable. Task variable is like as the name suggests, these are actions in experiment. Like for example, you were doing that maze learning. In maze learning, the various tasks are given, right? Whenever you take that task, number of performances given in particular trial, that is what that is an action, right? Those kind of variable are task related variables, which are called as task variables. And second type is environmental variable, wherein noise, temperature, light, and whatever the things are available in the environment, those are called as environmental variable. And subject variable, which is specific to the sample or the subject which we will be taking, like say age, height, weight, all these things are subject variable. I don't think further explanation needed in understanding these three types. Next, let's look into extraneous variables. Extraneous variable is something which pops in between, dependent and independent variable. That's why I mentioned in the previous diagram, I mentioned in the in a separate box. You must remember the term, extra. Like here in extraneous variable, we have got something extra. Fine. So usually in a study, we will focus on independent variable and dependent variable. But when something else also influences the independent variable and the relationship between independent and dependent variable, those types of variable are called as extraneous variable. It is not a independent variable, but it affects the dependent variable. Those type of variable. Fine. Let me explain extraneous variable with the same example which we saw earlier, like the sample wherein we had students, different teaching methods, and we saw its effect on achievement. Fine. So when we were doing this experiment, we suddenly realized that the sample, the students, their intelligence level has an influence. Yes or no? Right. The intelligence level may also affect the achievement. Right. Or even intelligence level may also affect how much students grasp from each teaching method. It can affect or not? Yeah, it can of course affect. For example, like if you are constructing this experiment into very kind of some more typical strategies you are using or various designs you are using for this experiment, like you divide these sample into 3 different groups: group A, group B, and group C. And then you give first teaching method to group A, second to group B, third to group C, like that and all. You are making complex designs. In that case, when you're dividing the groups and all, that intelligence level plays a very important role. Like for example, group A has all intelligence people, and group B has moderate, and group C has low intelligent students. It happened, by mistake it happened. Then what will happen? Obviously the result will be like first teaching method and will be better achievers, right? But is it right? Are we actually measuring the teaching method here? No. Our intention is to know which teaching method is better, but here the intelligence is playing a role in it, right? So we need to control intelligence. Similarly, like skill of a teacher. For example, we have hired 3 different teachers for 3 different methods, and whom we hired for this video lectures is a very skilled teacher, experienced and skilled teacher. Fine. But other 2 method, the teachers are not so effective. What will happen? Obviously that will influence our result. Fine. So these 2 variables which are not at all a part of the study, it is not coming under independent or dependent variable, we didn't consider it at all, or we may consider it, but it has an influence on the dependent variable. These will be called as extraneous variables. Fine. I'll further explain extraneous variable. There are few types of extraneous variable, so you will understand it better. Fine. Next, qualitative and quantitative. Very simple type of two types of variable. By name itself you can predict what are these types. Like qualitative is which are no magnitude, no measurement. It's not possible to measure. Like for example, last class we were discussing about feminism. Fine. Attitude of people towards feminism, like attitude A, attitude B, attitude 3, C. Fine. There is no magnitude between these variables. Maybe in that research, feminism research, we can have attitude of people. Few people have this kind of A type of attitude, B type of attitude, C type of attitude. Can you say that this attitude is better than this, or this is higher than this? We cannot measure those attitudes, right? But we can just simply say this is type A, type B, type 3. That's it. Differentiation is possible, but we cannot say the magnitude, or we cannot measure it numerically. For example, like few examples for this qualitative type of variable: sex, religion, and other types. Fine. You cannot say male and female. We cannot give magnitude, we cannot give measurement to these things. Fine. Those kind of variables are called as qualitative variable, whereas the opposite is quantitative variable. Like numericals are assigned and magnitude is possible, measurement is possible. Like for example, intelligence, age, all these things. There is magnitude, there is it is possible to measure these type of variables. Those are called as quantitative variables. Next 2 types are continuous and discrete. These are 2 types of quantitative variables, wherein we have got quantity, numericals, and we are able to measure it. But among them there are 2 types. One is continuous variable and discrete variable. Continuous variable is something which is possible to break. For example, like age, date, and extra. If I ask you, what is your age, you will say, even I'm asking your age today, you'll be able to say that, these many years, these many, months, these many days, and these many hours. It's possible to break it, right? Even, smallest unit, it's possible to say. For example, like length can be, these many kilometers, meters, centimeter, millimeter, like that. You can go deeper. It's easy to break, which is continuous in nature. But discrete variable is, opposite to continuous variable, wherein, number of people is a very good example for it. Fine. For example, if I ask you, how many of you have seen the last video and how many of you did not see the last video? Fine. So can you say that, among 18 of you, 9.5.6 or like 9.5 people saw the video, and remaining people did not see. Can you say that like that? People we cannot break, right? Divide, or we cannot make it to it is either 7 or 8 or 8 or 9. And there is no 8.5 and 9.5. But in age we have 8.5, 9.5. It is easy to break it. Fine. But here it is not possible to break. Only thing which you can do with discrete variable is count them. Fine. And divide them into groups. It is also called as categorical variable, because discrete variable are used for dividing the sample into categories on the basis of the number. Fine. So these are the two types in the quantitative variable. Next is, moderator and intervening variable. These two types has a very good relation with the extraneous variable. It's also called as, types of independent variable and secondary independent variable. It's called as. Fine. This has a connection with these are, you can also say it as, types of extraneous variable. It's not directly independent variable, but it is extraneous variable. It's not directly measured or directly seen its effect on dependent variable, but it has an influence. For example, moderator variable, which is manipulated or selected. For example, we are seeing intelligence in that, right? I said intelligence of level of students will affect the study. So what can you do in that study? While selecting the students themselves, you can select them on the basis of their intelligence. Maybe if you are dividing the students into 3 groups, we can make sure we can conduct an intelligence test, and we can make sure that every class has both intelligent and those students who have scored very good marks in intelligence test and those who did not score very good marks. You can divide them on the basis of equal level of intelligence in each class. You can make sure that, right? You can manipulate and you can select. In that way, what you can do, you can control the effect these extraneous variable has on the independent and dependent variable relationship. So those type of variables are called as moderator variable, which are moderator. And sometimes the researcher will be interested in knowing what is the moderator variable. Okay, teaching method and achievement level. What is a moderator variable? They will predict these can be a moderator variable. Intelligence can be a moderator variable, or skill of teacher can be a moderator variable, and they try to measure it also. Fine. But intervening variable are those variable which cannot be seen or manipulated, but still it will have an effect on it. For example, like likeness, favorite teacher. Among these 3 teachers, one type of students had one teacher as favorite teacher. What will happen when you have favorite teacher? You will learn that subject better, right? But can you control it, or can you even measure it or see it, understand it? Not possible. But still very well that it has an influence on the dependent variable and the independent variable relationship. These are also extraneous variable only, but we cannot control it or even measure it. Okay, so these type are called as intervening variables. Okay, next type, the last one is active and attribute variable. Very as the name suggests, active variable are those variable which are manipulated in the study. For example, reward, punishment, and extra. Like you can actually give reward, actually give punishment. These are possible to modify, mold, or give or take. These type of variable are called as active variable. The other have attribute variable which cannot be manipulated. For example, it's also called as organismic variables. For example, age, sex, intelligence, you cannot actually manipulate it, change it. Only thing, attribute variable you can select on the basis of attributions. Fine, it's not possible to manipulate. So these are called as attribute variable. And let me wind up by saying some common misunderstandings students have, which I usually see in the class among students in understanding these concepts, various types of variable. First one, why do we have variables? What is the purpose of all these terms used in research? Because one variable may be because we saw in the previous classes that research should be objective and it should be replicable. Fine. So if somebody else want to replicate your study, or somebody wants to understand your study, it is important that they must know how you have used different variables in your study. Fine. So it is important to define the variable. Whatever variable you are used, you must also say how you are using the variable. Fine. It's like roles in drama, like the entire class, your class, you are there and I'm asking you to put up a drama. Fine. But your actual character will be, you as a person will be someone, and in the drama you will be playing certain roles. Similarly, our variables also. Height is something, like for example, let's take the same example, teaching and achievement. Teaching method and achievement, its effect on achievement we were seeing, right? Here, like teaching method is one variable, right, which can be an active variable which is manipulated. It can also be called as an independent variable, like various names can be attributed to this particular variable which is teaching method. Fine. Here in this study, teaching method is what? Independent variable, and achievement is dependent variable, right? We saw like that in the first example. But here, this is one study one. There is a next study wherein I want to know the relationship between achievement and self-esteem. Whether those who have higher achievement, higher marks, score higher marks in a study, has higher self-esteem, or this affects the self-esteem or not. In the study 2, the achievement automatically becomes independent variable and self-esteem becomes dependent variable. Understanding? So we cannot always say that achievement is always dependent variable. No, not like that. It depends on the study. It depends on the experimenter. Experimenter can actually change the way one variable is used in a study. It's possible. Fine. So it depends on the experimenter. So it is important for each experimenter or researcher to define what type of variable they are using and how they are using the variable. Fine. So it's like assigning roles in one drama you may play a role of a student. In another drama you may play a role of a mother. Fine. So it like similarly are variables also. One variable in one study it will have one form, in another study it will have another form, and even in the study it will change forms. Fine. So it is very important to understand how a researcher needs to define that particular variable. Fine. Next, so it is like, don't get confused, because students usually get confused. Achievement, you said it as a dependent variable, now you are saying it is an independent variable. How come it is like that? So it is like used in different manner in different studies, and the researcher has the freedom to change it. However they want, they can use it. Next is similar variable names, like that's what I was explaining here also. Similar variable names will be there. For example, if you take another textbook, like for Kothari's textbook, for discrete variable that they may give some other name. They may say organismic variable. You get confused. There the similar definition is given, some other name is given. Don't get confused. Each researcher or each author may give their own type of definition. For example, independent variable and dependent variable. Fine. Independent variable and dependent variable, by some authors they say it as they explain independent and dependent variable as stimulus variable and response variable. This is another name for independent variable and dependent variable. In some studies and all, you will find stimulus variable and response variable. Don't get confused. Fine. And this stimulus variable and response variable is more used in qualitative studies, and also kind of non-experimental researchers, not experimental researchers but non-experimental studies. We use this term stimulus variable and response variable, wherein one is considered as stimulus and another variable is considered as response. So don't get confused with the similar variable names. And independent variable, like you cannot always have independent variable and dependent variable in a study. It's not compulsory that you should have independent variable and dependent variable both in a study. In some studies, like wherein you have got a descriptive kind of study, only one variable will be used, and those variable will be sometimes mentioned as independent variable. So don't get confused when you have only one variable used in the study and you are not doing an experimental study, you are doing a non-experimental study. In non-experimental studies, only one variable will be used, and that sometimes some author or some researcher used to call that variable as independent variable. These are the common misunderstandings students have. I hope you are clear about it. Thank you so much for your patience listening, and I want you to go back, read the textbooks and understand it very clearly. Even slightest of doubts, you have to clear it and come back with your questions and clarifications. Thank you so much.